All right, a minute past the hour. Hello. Greetings, everybody. Greetings to GRESB members and ESG colleagues, Canada, Brazil, Mexico, United States, and from all around the globe. Thank you for joining us today for the 2021 GRESB Canada Results Event. My name is Dan Winters. I'm the GRESB Head of Americas, your host for what promises to be a great event. Many themes to cover today. Here's three: climate change, COVID, carbon exposure. Here's what those mean. Right? From climate change, we're talking about physical risk analysis, what's happening as the climate does change to those assets on the ground. COVID, we've been experiencing a pandemic for the past 20 months. How is that affecting building operations? We're going to talk about that a lot today. Carbon exposure and reduction targets. This is boiled up into transition risk. Carbon, COVID, climate change. Three themes for today, but wait, there's two more bonus. Prop tech and change. Change is inevitable. Organizational change happening all the time. So we're going to touch on those two bonuses as well. Is this an aspirational agenda? You bet. We have a great expert panel of Canada's ESG experts with us. They're experienced GRESB veterans, and I'm fully confident that everybody's up to the task. On October 1st, was a big day. We released our results, and can you believe yet again, Canada was number one. Number one in North America on GRESB in 2021 on the real estate assessment. But there's a little controversy because Brazil, they're nipping at the heels, right? They weren't quite statistically significant enough to claim a number one spot. Canada, you are still number one. Way to go. 2 thumbs up. 41 Canadian firms participated in the real estate assessment. It's slightly over $200 billion in AUM. There were other Canadian funds that participated, and they are typically in the United States. Some are in the EU as well. So Canada is very, very well represented in the benchmark. I want to start with a really big thanks. Big thanks to the GRESB team. ESG is a team effort. So it takes all of us pulling together, all the people that have dialed into this call, but to make this event shine. Alex, Anna, Sasha, you guys have been great. And I certainly hope that everybody here on this call gets a chance to meet them one of these days. They do like to come and travel to our events, and they're doing a great job. Chris from RealPAC, outstanding, $1 million. Couldn't do it without you. You do a great job corralling the Canadian market. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So a little housekeeping. So before we get started, there's a couple things. One, the GRESB public results, they're posted on our website. They're underneath the sub tab underneath Insights. So check it out. We have a new website that we launched in conjunction with the results on October 1st. Hopefully you like it. The web team has been receiving some nice compliments from the GRESB members. This webinar is being recorded. It will be posted online, and the URL will be sent around to all of the registrants at the conclusion of the show. For questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom. I'll monitor this throughout as best I can. And then as a final note, the refreshments, they're in the back, in the restroom, it's around to the right. And I just love that. And I picked that up from my co-host, Michael Brooks. He said that last year at our GRESB results event, and I just thought that was the bomb. So with that, I'd like to have Michael Brooks join me here, right? He is the CEO of RealPAC. It's Canada's preeminent real estate association. He's a consummate professional and a true leader. Keeps the pulse in the national market, driving industry progress, but he also represents Canada on the global stage. Michael, welcome to the 2021 GRESB Canada Results Event. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thanks, Dan, for that great intro, and welcome to everybody. It's great, Dan, to keep working with you under the new GRESB. What are we, GRESB 3.0? I think so. I think it's 3.0. As we do with all of our committee meetings and other meetings, I'd like to first begin our event today by recognizing the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of Canada as traditional stewards and caretakers of the land. We acknowledge that RealPAC's office is covered by Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. It is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples as part of an intricate nationhood that reaches across Turtle Island. Turtle Island means North America. At this time of truth and reconciliation, we welcome the opportunity to together build new understandings and new relationships, ask for guidance in all we do, and commit to working towards creating a just and inclusive society. So with that, Dan, I was thinking about this. I think we've been GRESB Canadian National Partner for 7 years. I'm thinking 7.
I
But
think
we're
more.
certainly, maybe more, and we're certainly delighted to once again be co-hosting it with you for 2021. And this is the second time we've had to do it virtually. And while the COVID-19 pandemic is hopefully slowing down everywhere, ESG and sustainability drivers continue to grow, converge, and accelerate faster than ever. And with so much going on, it's so important to have a program like GRESB, where commercial real estate owners and infrastructure participants can report on all of their ESG activities in a structure and see their progress annually and see how they compare to their peers. It's kind of like competition. It's good competition, and it's a benchmark. Dan, back to you.
Well, no, this is great. And the reason why I thought it was longer than 7 years is I remember back to 2014, 15, 16, when we would come and do a training in March every year at the RealPAC headquarters up on the 40th floor of TD Bank.
Yeah.
And we would have a conference room, and maybe we'd get 15 or 20 people, energetic, enthusiastic. A fair amount of people on this call were part of those, right? And so now we've got 300 people on this call. We used to have our results events at the Omni Showroom, and there would maybe be 100, 150 that would come. But boy, the momentum is definitely here. It feels like we've moved from the conference room to the conference hall. And so is that the kind of momentum that we're seeing in Canada? Can you give us a flavor of sort of what's happening with the broader Canadian membership when it comes to ESG, the themes that are on the table?
Yeah, it continues to accelerate. And I would say that the goalposts are moving. On the investor side, I hosted a session at the Canada Green Building Council conference last week with Barb Svan, the new CEO of the University Pension Plan, who's really a thought leader on responsible investment ESG. And high ESG performance is now table stakes in the global equity investment community. Doesn't matter whether you're in Europe, Japan, Middle East, Norway, Patagonia. And it's broadening out, and our members are noticing it on the equity side with more of a risk-based and materiality focus. And we now see more direct links to the bottom line and long-term performance, both in real estate and in many other industries. So it's permeating. It's validated, it's becoming more urgent, and it's demanded on the equity side. Of course, we all know about the growing, and we'll talk about it on the panels, hopefully, the growing number of net zero portfolio pledges with various target years, alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, my little pin here. So on the investor side, they're pressuring real estate operators to do more, and the pressure on real estate operators is coming from a number of sources. On the lender side, you have Europe's Sustainable Finance Directive, and it's interesting, lenders there are starting to screen borrowers on their carbon footprints, scopes 1 to 3. Transition risk due diligence is what they're doing now. And we think that's soon going to come to North America. And then, of course, the regulated entities like the REITs, the banks, and the insurers have Tcfd, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, equivalents coming on the regulatory side. So for our members, for real estate operators, a lot of focus is on net zero, or at least substantial emissions reductions and how to get there. Also on natural, and I know one of the panelists is going to talk a lot more about that, if not more, also on natural hazard assessment and mitigation. Been a key issue for several years now. And more social justice issues like equity, diversity, and inclusion. Of course, it's Black Lives Matter, it's anti-Asian racism, it's all of that demographic integration that we need to do as an industry. So what I see broadly and generally, if you take all these little pieces and aggregate it up, is a push to change business ethics, and real estate is part of this. If you want the privilege of state legislated limited liability, you better help make your community, your country, and the world a better place. That's kind of big picture.
Michael, you've teed us up well. You hit all of the themes for today. Love it. One of the things you just brought up early on in your comments was this idea of I use the word pressure, right? I'm trying to find a different word, but basically, as I have experienced the sustainability industry, there was a lot of bottom up, right? People doing things at the building level, and then these building ratings came about. But now we're seeing something else. We're seeing this top down push, if you will. And the reason why I bring this up is a year ago, right after our event, you tuned me onto this group, this executive education program, ESG and corporate boards. And I know that you were really excited about it when you told me, you know, that I should check this out. And I'm hoping to take this next year. Anything that you took away from that event that you're seeing here that's playing out?
Yeah, it really was, it's called ESG competent boards. And there's a subsequent one called climate competent boards. And I dragged Chris through the latter, and I've taken the former. And it's multi-industry and it's global. So you get a structured view of what the world is doing. And it's really fascinating. I can remember the first hire in Canada of someone with sustainability in their title. I could be wrong on this, but it was Daryl Neat, and it was January the 1st of 2008. So 2 years after an inconvenient truth. I still don't know of the first hire at a board level of a major real estate company of a sustainability professional, and I'm waiting for that to happen. So at the board level, we know that accountants get appointed to boards all the time, and they run the audit committee. But this is so important now. It's strategic for every company. I think one of the waves we're going to see is climate competent boards, not just one person like an accountant, but the whole board needs to be trained on what's happening in this space. So it's strategic, it's mission critical, it's risk, it's compliance, it's opportunity, and it's future direction. So that's what I'm starting to see generally in terms of that coming. And it's interesting how so many industries seem to be so far ahead of us, and we don't realize how far ahead they are. I think, Chris, both you and I were stunned about how well the shipping industry is doing, and Maersk being a leader there, how some of the oil and gas companies are pivoting already. We have a net zero scope 1 and 2 oil and gas company in Canada. Probably no one knows who it is. I know who that is, not scope 3, but scope 1 and 2. So, and there's a convergence that I'm seeing of major standards. The new Value Reporting Foundation is all about the integration of sustainability and financial reporting. The CFA Institute came out a few days ago with a standard on financial products and ESG disclosure on financial products. The International Accounting Standards Board is coming out with a standard. So, and then of course we have COP26, and we have Mark Carney's GFANZ, which is the Glasgow Financial Accountability for Net Zero group, and all of the net zero groups beneath it. So some more groups popping up, but everybody converging on the same goal. And I think that's going to continue to push real estate around the world.
Great job. So ESG momentum, there it is, right? Exactly there. Tremendous leadership from Canada. Thank you so much. Stick around because you and I are going to close this after we hear from our great panel. But first, I just wanted to segue into the GRESB 2021 results. Perfect. Okay, so collectively, we had a great year. GRESB benchmark membership has grown to its highest level yet. We had 1,520 funds and firms participate on the real estate side. That was plus 25%. 117,000 assets, 5.7 trillion AUM. It's been a 12-year journey for us to get here. In 2021 boils down to these 3 trends: climate, COVID, carbon. Climate, COVID, carbon, and change. Don't forget about change. Change is afoot for sure. Organizational change, regulatory change, technology change, right? Michael touched upon all of these things. So let's take a look at the highlights. First off, investors. Investors have been driving since the get-go in 2009, when 3 of them got together and created the first sustainability-oriented DDQ, due diligence questionnaire. And since then, the number of investors that have become part of GRESB has grown. In 2017, you see this big leap. That's when we launched GRESB Infrastructure. We also launched GRESB Public Disclosure. More institutional investors, gravitated to what we were doing, and here we are now, 140 plus. We've just added a couple, so I know that we're getting very, very close to 150. I'm hoping that one of the very large pension plans in Canada steps forward before we hit the end of the year. Very excited about that. Alex, let's go to the next slide. Here's some of the logos, right? It's not all of the GRESB members shown, but you'll see a number of the Canadians, and the Canadians are you know, the pension plans are very interesting because they're often captive, right? So we've got Canada Post, they're participating and they're doing it themselves, AIMCO as well, right? Oxford's a subsidiary, Cadillac Fairview, all types of leadership happening. But when I think about my seat here in North America, I'm seeing so much more happening in Canada. I'm really pleased and proud of you guys. Truly am. Thanks for leading. Go ahead to the next slide, Alex. On the participation side of the benchmark, you see that we started off in 2010 with 200. We have some people on the call today that were part of that initial 2010 group. And here we are, 1520. What I find great about this slide is the slope of the line. It was slow and steady, slow and steady, slow and steady, right? Sort of the early adopter curve. And all of a sudden, bang, the slope went north. 25% up the past 2 years. So this is now early majority, maybe middle majority. And I'm sensing that that slope is going to continue for 2022. Let's go forward. When you think about where the participation is coming from, about half by count comes from Europe, right? And it's sort of like these European values are coming over here to the US version of capitalism, if you will. I'll just call it the US version, right? That's by numbers. But if you add the total of AUM, the dollar amounts of Europe plus Asia, you get to the dollars in North America. So North America is where the money is. And we have tremendous influence as to what's happening for the decade ahead. Go ahead. So when you look at North America, there were 360, right? So there's 40 in Canada, the remainder, you know, there's roughly 8 in Mexico, 8 in Brazil. We have a nice, strong country partner now in Brazil, so they're going to be nipping at your heels, right? And so that slope of the line, again, strong, up, up, up. Go ahead, Alex. So let's talk about the scores. Scores went, as last year, the scores went down a little bit. We made this break. Go ahead. We made this break between performance and management and we pulled them apart. So scores retreated, and you can sort of see this in the line. Ooh, the line kind of broke a little bit. Sorry about this. The green dots throughout show the trajectory of the GRESB score throughout history. And then in 2020, it went backwards. In 2021, it moved up again. So you'll see that Oceania, they're a little bit ahead. I've got a slide on this in a bit. Everyone's doing great. The break line in this chart down below is where the break line was between the star rankings. These are mathematical constructs. 20% of all of the participants around the globe received a GRESB 5-star. Those were the top highest 20% by cohort. And then that's roughly 300, right, by math. So that also means that 300 received a GRESB 1-star. That is actually a great score, right? That means you're at 61 points. You are doing a great job. There's a whole lot of darkness out there. So by being transparent, by getting into the program and working the framework, right, you're starting to make progress. And I will tell you, all of the leaders in 5-star started off below a 60, without a doubt, to a person. Go ahead, next slide. So here's what it looked like in Europe, right? And you see some countries like the Nordics that you would expect way out in front and doing a great job and participating for a long time. And there's others that are kind of coming along, bringing their industry. So now let's go to the next slide. And I just did that for flavor. Here's what it looks like in the US. So, you know, Canada, they're ahead of North America, or I'm sorry, the United States when it comes to the overall score. Brazil wasn't statistically significant, so they're down there, but they're close. And Mexico, they're coming on. Okay. Next slide. Sector leaders. These are Canadian companies that achieve the top score in their sector, right? So there's 12 of them here. Many of them have been participating for a long time. A handful are have gotten their program going. I'm thinking like RioCan started, I believe, in 2017 or 2018, and man, have they come on strong. So good job to all of these folks that are here. We've got several of them that we're going to hear from today. And let's go to the next slide, because I broke it out as to who has 4 and 5 stars. And that's what this group looks like. Some of them submit multiple funds. So that's why they're, and these are also their Canadian funds. Bentall actually has more. We'll hear from Ailey in a while, where I won't spoil the show, but they've got more than two. It's just the two of them happen to be in Canada. So 3 more are within a point, 3 stars within 1 point of 4 stars. I'm confident that you can do a good job next year and break the tape. Okay, next slide. Oh, keep going. There we go. All right, so then I broke it down to Canada versus Australia because there's so many similarities between the two countries. Canada has concentration of people that are in Sydney, Australia, and Australia has them in Sydney, and then Canada has them in Toronto. And so just like Chris at RealPAC, he convenes the group on a monthly and quarterly basis to talk about ESG issues and is attracting more and more folks. Same dynamic happens down in Australia. And so because of these similarities, I ran a benchmark against the two. And so you'll see this concentration in the upper right. I've been talking about this since 2017, when we kept seeing these scores moving up and up and up. And there's really a tight race between, it could be a couple point difference between 4 stars and 5 stars and who's number 1 and who's number 4 or 5 in a sector even. Right, so that clustering in the upper right is a thing. There's also, just like in Australia and in Canada, there's people that are just getting started. And so what you're going to see is the people that are in the lower left, they're going to start moving to the upper right. And it's a global phenomena. Every country has the same experience. And so just wanted to put that in context. Go ahead to the next slide. Perfect. Over time, this is what those scores looked like. So back in the day, back in 2012, 2013, average score was about 50. Now we're up to average scores getting close to 80. That's amazing. This is going to create a problem for GRESB because not everybody can score 100, right? I guess everybody could, but there's always more work to do. So the benchmark will continue to evolve. It's not moving the goalposts as much as it's making progress and having the leaders pull the market along with them. So over time, there will continue to be evolution within the assessment, and we'll talk about that at the end of this deck. Go ahead, Alex. Performance data. So that's really the most difficult challenge, is acquiring the energy, water, waste, and greenhouse gas emission data for the portfolio. So here's the results of this. So EUIs in North America, you can kind of hone in and see what the results were this year. It's an odd year. We had COVID, right? The occupancy levels of different property types are very different than in the historical past. Multifamily numbers are higher. Office numbers are lower, but we're finding out that the baseline energy use is still pretty constant. So there wasn't as much variability as we thought. In Canada, we're seeing energy and GHG emissions down 8% year on year. That's pretty amazing, right? And I think Conan will have some comments about that in a little bit. Water's down a little bit, not as much as it was throughout the globe. And then waste, we're doing a really good job of diverting waste into alternatives besides dumping it into a hole in the ground. This is great news. So move ahead to the next one. So GRESB also has the infrastructure assessment. So let's take just a second and deviate a little bit, because the Canadian market does a really good job with investing in infrastructure as well, more so than we're able to do here in the US. Not reading the papers aside. So go ahead, Alex. Let's see what's happening in infrastructure. So we had the similar type of growth. 25% on the ups with both the fund and asset level assessment. There's 2 different assessments on the infrastructure side. There's a fund assessment for the fund managers to identify their leadership and management capabilities. And then there's, where the activity is the assets on the ground. And that's where the metrics are, the performance, the materiality. So 33 out of the 34 infrastructure sectors were covered in this year's assessment. That means that there was an asset that participated from 33 of the 34 sectors. We had nearly 150 funds to go with slightly over 550 assets, 25% growth, a lot of facilities covered, lots of money, 69 countries. Go ahead. Here's what that looks like graphically. So you're watching the slope of the line start to mimic what we're seeing in real estate. And keep in mind, the infrastructure assessment is 6 years old. So it's half as old as the real estate assessment. It's not as mature in the marketplace. But we're seeing, two of the founders of the institutional investor side, two of the founders of the infrastructure assessment were OTTP and AIMCO. So Canada had a seat at the table when this was developed because you do such a good job with your investing in infrastructure. So let's keep it going. Go ahead. Participation on the asset side, same thing. Slip of the line. We had a drop off on COVID last year. We had a number of airports, right? People were laying people off, and they were on furlough, and so doing an ESG assessment was not top of mind. So we saw a little dip, and now we're back up on the growth rate. And when Michael talked about TCFD and resilience and climate and all of the issues that set us in motion today, right? I'm confident that number will continue to increase at that rate or higher. Go ahead. Net zero target setting, right? Michael talked about this as well. So more and more funds and firms and assets on the ground are setting targets. Some are reduction targets, and some have no targets, right? That's what the gray line is. The sort of deep green is you have some kind of target. It could be, I'm seeing 25% by 2025, 30% by 2030, right? Those they have a ring to them. So they sell internally 30 by 30. Okay, so we're seeing a number of those showing up in the data set, but net zero is on the table. And we've seen real estate funds and companies hit that. We're seeing this start to emerge in infrastructure. Go ahead. Targets on the real estate side. So I just alluded to this. So here and on the left-hand side, this chart over here, the number at the top shows the participants. And then we'll see that no targets are kind of holding steady at 25%, about a quarter that show up in the benchmark every year, continue not to have a target. So usually the first or second year participants and thinking, well, should we, and have to convene people internally. And then you get your benchmark report and you see that, oh my goodness, the vast majority of our peers have targets, right? That's the dark green line up top. Maybe we should have a target. And now we're seeing net zero. 2019 started to get a toehold, 2020, and then organizations started to realize this and actually hit that net zero target by being directive with their purchases, buying green electrons from the grid. And so more and more organizations are saying, oh, I can see it can be done. Our peers are doing it. We should do it too. I think this is only going to grow. On the right-hand side shows the graph by region as to how these targets. You can see Oceania has really gone hot and heavy on net zero compared to the others, with Europe not too far behind. So I'm pretty confident we can catch up. We're good fast followers here in the Americas. Go ahead. Aha, so let's go ahead, Alex. So my colleagues have been working on some things in Amsterdam, and we're very excited to tell you about these things. So the first, and Ariel is going to start talking about transition risk in maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Transition risk. This is, where are we? You may have heard about CREM, which was an EU funded project that is on our website. And it shows if we're going to meet Paris, and the Paris Agreement shows a carbon line like this, where is your portfolio compared to that line? So that's about the decarbonization and how your organization, your fund, your firm is able to navigate that issue. So transition risk, right, is something that we're going to make available to our members. Not everybody has full data coverage. Don't worry. We're going to be able to fill in the gaps with you. We have 117,000 assets. The vast majority of them have data associated with them. So we're able to make some pretty solid estimates and GHG calculations in order to show transition risk for your specific portfolio. Let's go to the next slide. Tcfd Alignment. Michael talked about this, and this really builds upon our resilience module that went away last year, and it got infused within the GRESB assessment. So all of the questions where resilience was a sort of an option or a theme, there's now, it's baked into GRESB. We're taking that and we're re-elevating it into how prepared, how thoughtful the fund and firm is when it comes to climate resilience and climate related financial disclosures. So identify the gaps, be able to benchmark and communicate. This is another product that's on the drawing board and will be coming out in the first quarter. Go ahead. And then SFDR, for those that have an EU investor in their capital stack, the SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, is hot in the minds. Early in the year, everybody at GRESB, our emails blew up. with people that needed metrics. Oh my goodness, we have regulators that are asking us for scope 1, scope 2, for a whole range of issues that really flow into the GRESB assessment. And can you help us get these metrics? Well, yes, we're able to do that, right? Everyone has good solid data coming into GRESB, right? There's flexibility when it comes to reporting. This may not apply to everybody that's here on the phone or on the call because it's coming from the EU, but I'm confident that the vast majority of people do have an EU investor somewhere in the debt or equity stack. And so know that this is a service that we're offering to our members. Okay, let's go ahead. The last thing I want to talk about is our assessment roadmap. So, that clustering in the upper right, this has been going on and it's getting more and more, prominent. And so a year ago, we broke up management and performance much more clearly with the idea that we need to redefine what performance means. We have net zero portfolios. We've got the targets that are being actualized by some of the leaders, and we need a better mechanism to recognize and reward that within the assessment. So we're in phase 1, where we're defining our joint mission and vision of what this looks like. And for all of the GRESB members that are on the video and the call right now, I'm confident you've seen the communications coming out about this, and hopefully you were able to answer the survey and add your thoughts. We're really taking the pulse of our global membership base to understand what performance means and to redefine what it is within the assessment with an eye to 2024. So in phase 2, we'll be there next year from January to April, is about creating the strategy to guide us. And then in phase 3, we're going to really define the technical rigor behind this to be able to roll it out in 2024. So change, talked about climate, COVID, carbon, change is afoot as well. And change will be happening within GRESB in 2024. So Alex, is there one more slide or not? Maybe. Aha, no, you're right. We're going to hold that one back. Perfect. Oh, there he was. Okay, so let's take down the slides. It's perfect. Thank you very much. And I'm not going to do questions right now. So let's, I think, go and introduce Conan O'Connor. So Conan is the VP of Technology at EPL, Energy Profiles Limited. And I wanted to have Conan start and be first with us because I want to go back to those EUI metrics and the COVID and what's happening. If you don't know EPL by now, you definitely should. Neil Bach has been leading the charge for a long time, one of the top engineers and energy efficiency talents in Canada, 6,000 buildings, 15,000 meters, over $1 billion in energy spent. And so the EPL team, they're always bringing their A game. And I wanted to lead off with Conan here to talk about metrics and measures. So Conan, give us a flavor for what's happening in Canada when it comes to your client base, because you've got everybody, they're the best. So
perfect. Cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me back again. It's always great to be here. See everyone a year older. I don't need to tell anyone here about the challenges of operating buildings throughout COVID. It's obviously been a challenging time. High vacancy and low occupant density in office buildings and in retail. We've got new varied use profile for residential with people staying home, and industrial demand obviously through the roof over these last 18 months. With that, there's been this huge focus on health and safety and air quality. But at the same time, we need to operate buildings, right? There has to be air available. There has to be lighting and heating in properties. And of course, there's the regional variation as regulations evolve, devolve, re-evolve. It's a constant changing landscape. So, things are looking promising, of course, as people start to return to offices. But we know offices are starting to be used in new and different ways, and we expect this is going to continue to change in the coming years. All this is to say that understanding energy and sustainability performance in buildings is only becoming more critical and more complex. And initiatives like the RealPAC, normalized energy use intensity and water use intensity, Things like this are fundamental to understanding how buildings are performing as these use cases change. And at the same time, it's COVID spurred a lot of new technology and ways for collecting information in real time, things like real-time occupancy, understanding how buildings are being used more granularly. And all this is in the context, of course, of that global movement towards zero carbon that's really ramped up over the last year and a half. We've got COP26 going on right now. Trudeau's over there. He's talking about capping emissions from oil and gas, pushing for a global carbon tax. So there's lots going on. And so it's a really exciting time, I think, for all of us.
So Conan, what are the forward-facing themes that you're seeing that your clients are coming to you and saying, look, we have these problems, can you help us solve them?
Yeah, and I mean, so another thing that's not going to surprise anyone here, carbon, net zero, target setting is what everyone's working on and thinking about. For commercial real estate, we're accustomed to thinking about targets in terms of 2 years, 5 years. Now we're talking about 10, 20, 30-year type targets. And I mean, that sounds like a long time on one hand, but the moments when decisions are made about reducing or eliminating carbon in buildings, they're 20 and 25-year decisions for things like upgrading a boiler plant, getting rid of a boiler plant, replacing a roof or an electrical system in a building. These are big decisions, long-term green power purchase agreements. They're big decisions and they're big investments. Orders of magnitude different from the energy efficiency projects that we're accustomed to thinking about. And there's lots of uncertainty. 30 years, long time. There's carbon taxes, regional carbon limits, penalties. There's what's happening with the utility grids. There's what are the plans for specific assets. Ultimately, what is the market value of a zero carbon building going to be in 2030 and 2050 versus that of a high carbon building? That's kind of the question that we're all wrestling with. And our clients are starting by trying to create targets and plans at the portfolio level, and then figuring out how to track and implement at the asset level.
So are there any short-term wins that are out there? Is this a prop tech play? I've always felt like this is an OpEx CapEx, right? You do what you can, you pay real close attention to the OpEx, you reduce where you can, you plan out 2, 3, 5 years, you're talking even longer on a CapEx play, right? And then you become directed with your purchases, green power, right? Is that pretty much the playbook? And if so, are there any actual, juke to the right, run to the left plays that you can share with us?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. There's those two aspects now. There's, continuing to drive performance in your buildings, and then there's looking at the big CapEx decisions and making sure you don't miss those opportunities. In everyone's portfolio, somewhere, probably today, someone's making a decision that's going to be a 20-year decision that's going to have a big impact on carbon. I want to make sure we're not missing those opportunities, that we're making the right decisions in those cases. And it's working with the people in the organization. The organizational change part is hard, and there's lots of other people on the panel that I'm sure will talk to that in intimate detail. But yeah, like I say, it's an exciting time.
Excellent. Any of our panelists have any questions or observations for Conan?
Yeah, Dan, just I can add, Conan, thanks for those comments. I think your point of, the traditional way of thinking of equipment replacements through an OpEx or a CapEx lens that we've historically followed in the industry for years and years and years is changing, because it's no longer enough to simply replace a rooftop unit with another one that's maybe slightly more efficient. While that will continue to happen, I think it's important that we're thinking much longer term, and that requires a whole rethink of how we actually budget and forecast and predict with what we know now. So there's so many layers to how all of this has to come together, and yeah, it's a bit of an overwhelming task at times for sure.
Eiley, I haven't introduced you, but go. I mean, if you have some thoughts here, I'd love to hear them.
Dan, you're saving me from going last. I want to get a word in here. No, I certainly echo what Rob said. I mean, the way that our team is thinking about this is going to complete. I think, you know, we're getting a lot of so far, but the teams know that, you know, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been to overuse that saying, and that the shift needs to be for these larger things, and they're going to require budget. I think certainly a lot of the around that zero, around transition,
Perfect. So your mic was breaking up on us a little bit, but I think we got you. Transition risk, OpEx, low hanging fruit has been picked. And so now the sleeves are being rolled up. Anybody have any cool prop tech solutions that they want to offer here? Anybody seeing anything good?
Yeah, perhaps I can offer my 2 cents, Dan. I think at CF, what we've seen is by looking at not just those incremental steps on how to lower carbon and lower energy consumption, looking at how we can tune all the systems and equipments that we have inside the building that are not perhaps performing optimally. It's key to bringing that curve down. I think as we go through all these advanced technology deployment, it is as much as critical to making sure those equipments are performing the most optimal way. So at CF, we've been really for the last couple of years collecting millions and millions of data on an everyday basis and churning out actual corrective things that the site could do. So by and large, we've saved a couple $1 million along the way. And on that side of the fence too, the operator really enjoy being the recipient of actionable items on a day-to-day basis, and they don't need to wait a year for a retro commissioning study to be done or an energy audit to be done. They can get those real-time actionable items, at the fingertips, much more quickly than traditionally.
Perfect. Millions of data points, millions of dollars. Ringo, hold on to those things. We're going to come back to you in a little bit and talk a little bit more about prop tech. So let's shift and let's talk about climate, and let's move the conversation, right? COVID, carbon, climate. So let's go to climate. And we've got Ariel Feldman, who I specifically was waiting to go last because you're now going to go first. And so in 2019, with Choice Properties, they launched their ESG program, and their GRESB score improved by 21 points the following 2 years, right? Having a framework to follow and implement improvement and continuous improvement over time has proven to be helpful. And 20 million square feet of certified space, whether it's BOMA Best or LEED. And you've got some DEI commitments as well that I think all of the panelists, shared various flavors of those commitments. So near as I can tell, you're killing it up there and driving progress and making change. I want to tackle 2 topics, right? Physical climate risk and transition risk. So talk to us a little bit. You availed yourself of the Munich Ray data on our website and ran the portfolio through that. What was your experience? What did you find out? And what kind of caused you to do this?
Well, there's a number of drivers. We wanted to understand if we were if we had an understanding of climate risk, physical climate risk at our assets. We have a good sense of which assets have had issues in the past, but we wanted to understand if that was going to change going forward. And actually, when we started thinking about the properties that have issues today, one of the sanity checks that we did was to check it against the Munich data and make sure that it did show up in that Munich data. And we're happy to say that it did. So that gave our team some confidence that the data was accurate. And it was important for us when we were picking a partner to make sure that the data was going to be reliable. Munich RE is one of the foremost providers of this data, so we were very comfortable with that. We also wanted to make sure there was a high resolution of data because we wanted to understand, especially on the flooding side, which we know as real estate owners is a tragedy waiting to happen. You can have a building up the street from another one where one building will flood and the other one will not. And that's why the high resolution of data is very important, because if you have a resolution that's 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers, you could group the whole city of Toronto or the whole city of Vancouver into that box, and you wouldn't have any better data. So that was really important to us. We layered on asset value and resilience measures so we could understand what value was at risk, and we could also understand if we were protecting that value. And so then we got the results, and we used it for disclosure to TCFD. I think many of our peers are doing that as well. It's become very important to do that. We're actually disclosing in line with the SASB requirements as well. And really fundamentally, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the data that we've received and improve the resilience of our assets. And so we're starting to pilot the recommendations that we received as part of that study on a number of different assets and understand what we can do in the short term and the long term. I can give you an example. The short term doesn't need to be high cost. It can be low and no cost. It can be like activities that we do. At one of our assets, we determined that we are filling up a generator tank every 3 years. So we changed that to every year. There's really no harm there, but now we're better prepared if there is an extreme storm that hits that asset. So we can run that generator for longer. And so it's small things like that that we're trying to implement in our portfolio. And then, so we're trying it at a few assets, and then we're going to try to roll it out across the portfolio.
So is that like a typical, forgive me, I don't know how big the portfolio is, but you basically do a triage, right? And you understand these up here are maybe the most exposed or most value at risk, and you hone in on them. Right? Were there any themes that drove them all, or were some wildfire, others flood, or kind of give us a little bit more specific flavor?
Yeah, so we have over 700 properties in our portfolio, and so triaging is exactly what we wanted to do. And so we narrowed it down. There's a number of different risks that we assessed with the Munich Re data, and so you would have flood and wildfire and extreme storms, and so it was really important to understand what type of risks were most impactful for real estate. And so we kind of settled on flooding and extreme storms, fire, and sea level rise. Those are the ones that would cause catastrophic loss. And so when we were triaging, we focused on those ones. We focused on high value assets with the highest risk and the lowest mitigation of risk, that the ones that we weren't mitigating the risk at the most. So that's how we narrowed down the list, and we pulled it from 700 to 16. And now we're narrowing it even further to a few assets where we can really dig in deep before we try to roll it out across the list of assets that are higher risk.
Wow, great, good job. Well, keep us posted on this, because I don't know, because I think in my world, you're first. You're the one that's the furthest along that I'm aware of. So good job, keep it going. Let's talk about transition risk. Right, because climate risk sort of gets into that. We've got this low carbon, right? Where's our electrons coming from? So how are you guys thinking about it, and how are you tackling your transition risk?
So we're really just starting on the transition risk. I want to give a shout out. I saw Michael Brooks shaking his head. We're definitely not the first. We've got some very, very strong peers on this call who have also been doing a lot of assessments. So hopefully what I talked about will help anyone who hasn't really done an assessment yet. Because I think it's the key message that I guess I want to share is that it's not that hard. You should just get started. I think once you have an understanding of where the risk is, you can move to support your property management teams in improving on your resiliency. On the transition risk, we're just starting out. We're looking at our assessment we're doing an assessment across our portfolio, and as a retail risk. As a retail REIT with industrial as well, we're really driven by scope 3. So we understand that typically, REITs in North America haven't really been focusing on the retail and industrial sector because there's not a lot of control. And we're trying to reframe how we're thinking about those types of assets, because we know that those assets are going to be subject to regulations going forward as we transition to a zero carbon economy. And so we're trying to understand what our responsibility is, not what our control is, but what our responsibility is as owners and managers of those types of assets. And so we're starting to think about things like, if you're going to put a gas-fired rooftop unit on a retail center, what obligation do you have to that tenant down the line to change that out to an electric heat pump? Because how can you expect your tenants to go net zero if they're being given gas-fired equipment? So we have to start thinking about our responsibility as owners. We don't have zero control over these assets. And really scope 3 is the bulk of our footprint, and I think the bulk of many of our peers' footprints as well. And any net zero commitment that doesn't include scope 3 is or at least look at scope 3 is not really going to be as impactful as one that includes it.
Yeah, it's super thoughtful, right? And that's the thing that I've always appreciated when I have conversations with folks north of the 49th is we're thinking about the whole portfolio and how we're in this together, right? And doing right by the tenants and controlling the whole building, even if you don't, right? And if you did, what should you be doing? So does Ariel's comments, how do they, because everybody on this call has similar assets within their portfolios. How does his leadership here resonate with you guys?
Yeah, I like to think that we are as landlords, the stewards of the property, the tenants and essentially the tenant's resource. And so we have the obligation to make sure that we make the best use of the electron or the cubic meter of gas to make sure that they have the ventilation and the heating and the cooling that is required. I think there is that more obligation then as an extension to help enable them in transitioning off with the high carbon intensive fuel. So one thing that we're trying to look at is how do we collaboratively work with key tenants across the nation in thinking of innovative ways, whether that be financing or pragmatic ways, to lower our carbon emissions collectively and jointly. We're probably at the infancy stage of that conversation, but I think there have been some interesting bites, and we're trying to follow those leads. But I think that's for sure a very impactful way and significant endeavor for us to reach to where we want to be.
Sort of an observation for everybody, but doesn't this potentially mean that the landlord's going to carry more of the economic water? Right? What about, how do you split the cost? How do you either share this or convince the tenant that this is in their best interest? Anybody?
Yeah, I think it could go both ways. Some of it could actually be driven by the tenants, with them coming at us and say, hey, we want to achieve our net zero goal. And we look at our operational scope 1 and scope 2. And I think we have an opportunity here because we reside in one of the buildings, and this is one of the most carbon intensive buildings that we have in our portfolio. So I think those conversations are very much dynamic. And again, as we row to the same direction together, I think the opportunities are quite boundless and limitless. It's really just trying to get through the hurdles of the traditional way of doing things and think of more creative ways to approach this very important topic together.
And I might just add, it comes back to that, what's the value of a net zero asset going to be in 2030, 2050 compared to a high carbon asset? And that's what it's going to come down to with industrial too, regardless of who has control per tenant landlord agreements. It's a very real thing, and I know many are struggling with it. It hasn't been figured out yet, but it's definitely an important piece.
Other comments? No, Rob? You don't have.
Yeah, no, I was just going to echo what Ringo was saying. I think, again, historically, the landlord-tenant relationship has been kind of clearly defined, and that is starting to evolve. And we're seeing cases where, tenants have their own net zero ambitions or ESG targets. How, as landlords, do we sort of supplement and support that? And can we solve these things together? And, there's ways of looking at lease structures and who pays and when they pay and how they pay and how much they pay, and all of that can be part of the discussion. But ultimately, if we're all sort of trying to achieve the same goal, why can't we think differently about how that relationship needs to evolve going forward? And that's the position we're trying to take on it. But obviously lots to do there and trying to figure out. It's a slow moving evolution in this space for sure. But if you don't get the tenants on board, most of this is frankly impossible. So there's got to be a solution that has to be found there.
Eiley, you've got a complicated global organization. Are there places that are pockets that are more progressive or less progressive, or kind of what are you seeing?
Absolutely. And just quickly on the mic check here, how are we doing on the connection?
You're doing great. Good job.
Awesome. Yeah, no, certainly Europe is light years ahead of where we're at, and the discussions that are happening around what's required through legislation. And so, you know, we're looking at whole building data for our industrial assets in Europe, and looking for ways to get a hold of it and engage with tenants. The trajectory of those discussions is certainly much steeper than how we're sort of dealing with them here in North America, but they're certainly leading the way.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, let's transition from transition risk and climate risk, and let's just talk about well, if I may, you know, we're going to go to Rob, and you know, Ivanhoe Cambridge has had quite a year. Right? And about a month ago, they had a headline grabber where they tied an $8.5 billion financing to a couple ESG KPIs. One of those includes a GRESB score. And I talked about how this GRESB score is going to evolve and change over time. So that feels, you know, like it could be, well, we're going to talk about that in a second, right? But I want everyone to appreciate the ripple effects here. $8.5 billion in corporate financing for some ESG KPIs. So if you do really well, the rate goes down. And if you don't deliver, then the rate goes up. And we're talking about net zero goals and all of the issues that have gotten us to this point in the program. So CDPQ is Ivanhoe's parent company, its main financial partner, but there were 11 other North American and European banks that were part of this. And I'm just going to read off this list so everyone can appreciate the ripple effects. We've got Bank of Montreal, BNP Paribas, Citi, Crédit Agricole, Desjardins, which, well, they did. There's a gentleman at Desjardins that did a really good job converting creme for Canada. It's a sideline. We can talk about that offline sometime. Desjardins, National Bank of Canada, Natixis Royal Bank of Canada, the Bank of Nova Scotia, Toronto Dominion Bank, and Wells Fargo. I mean, these are powerhouse banks. And so for them to step forward, wrap their brains around an $8.5 billion financing tied to ESG KPIs, you think they might do this again? You think they might have these conversations with some others? So I don't know. So between that, Rob, and the fact that last week you were at PRIA accepting their first ever inaugural Institutional Investor Award, I mean, quite an October for you guys. What do you have to say for yourself?
Yeah, it's been quite a year. It's been great. It's been busy. Lots going on, but super exciting stuff. We've seen, you know, the evolution of all of these things come to a bit of a head. And I mean, Ivanhoe's done some great work and we're very proud of that, but the industry is evolving and moving quickly towards these areas. And we think that they're critical areas that we need to address and be part of the solution. I think historically we've talked about all of this, sometimes maybe framing it in one type of conversation or one solution. And really, what we have found through our, you know, development of our net zero commitments and coming up with the roadmap of how we're going to get there, this is a multi-pronged approach that has a million things that need to go right, and they're not always the same million things. Sometimes I say a million, sometimes I say 1,000. It's somewhere in between those two numbers. A lot of things have to come together to make all of this work as an industry, and you know, they need to complement each other. And the sustainable financing piece obviously is a critical component that we hadn't tapped into as much in the past that we've been able to in the last year. So, you know, you need the support internally to pull a program like that together. You need everybody in agreement on what we're trying to do. And we've got some great teams that led that conversation and we were able to support on the metrics. Yeah, it's hopefully a game changer in terms of how we think of some of these things and allows us to reinvest hopefully some of those savings in future initiatives related to carbon reductions and other ESG initiatives. So yeah, great progress for us up to date on that piece.
Let's talk a little bit about these KPIs and you know, so for the folks that are on the call, Rob has been the chairman of our benchmark committee, right? So we have a governance construct where we have investor advisory boards on the one hand, and then we've got our governance committees, which are made up of the participants. And Rob is the chairman of the North American Benchmark Committee. So he's been with us for a long time, thinking about the issues around GRESB and how we're going to navigate forward. So the fact that this GRESB score is one of the KPIs, I mean, you must have had some internal conversations about this, and you've got a sort of deeper lens into this. So can you talk about what you anticipate is going to happen and how this came to be?
Sure. So yeah, to answer your initial point, yes, there were lots of internal conversations about this and what the KPIs should be and what they actually mean. And we know that as GRESB continues to evolve and the benchmark gets harder and the survey gets harder, there's a risk of tying some of your financial metrics to something that's going to increasingly get more difficult. But the converse of that is this whole issue of climate change and what we're doing, it needs big, bold thinking, and it needs sort of fundamental transformational change in how we address these things. If we're not using tools like GRESB to pull us in the right direction, it can't be about always having metrics that are easily attainable or that we already meet. It has to drive serious, significant change. So that was a lot of the discussion on, and to the bank's credits, this wasn't a fait accompli for any of them. They needed to see ambitious KPIs being put in place. And we had several conversations with them to convince them that, yes, in fact, these were ambitious commitments and not simply check the box kind of exercises. So, as GRESB evolves away from, we think, management and sort of policy intent driven outcomes to performance driven outcomes, we're going to see more emphasis put on how operational assets actually perform, whether it's through carbon emissions, energy, climate change preparedness, all of those sort of key things that are fundamental to where we need to go. It was important for us that we understood that, but also that, yeah, those are key things that we need to do anyway. So let's use GRESB as the sort of leverage piece to help pull us along. And we're sort of satisfying a couple of different requirements at the same time, following that same approach.
So have you figured out the game plan, right? And so as you answer that, how's the team holding up? Because these are ambitious targets, and the team's got to go, oh my God, we got to deliver.
Yeah. There's, I used to joke that I always slept well at night, and then that $8.5 billion announcement came out, and I was like, "Whoa, that one might keep me up a little bit." So, no, the team's great. It's a super creative, ambitious, passionate group we've got that helps push all of this, and really, we've tried to map out as well as we can and really think through the deliverables. But there's also an understanding that some of this is unknown. There's a leap of faith here. We don't know all the answers to how we're ultimately going to get there. We're figuring it out like everybody else, but it's great. It's really motivating, I think, to have these massive sort of initiatives to be working on. So, we have some group therapy sessions online and whatnot. We were able to get together in person a couple of weeks ago for the first time in a year and a half. It was great to be able to do that. So anyway, it's all very positive. We're really pleased with how things are going and where they're hopefully going to continue to go.
Are there questions for Rob from the panelists? I mean, I'm still keen to know what the order of, usually something like this is 100 days. What are you going to do the first 100 days to try to get the momentum going for the rest? So I don't know. That would be my question. Do others have a question for Rob before? I mean, don't answer mine yet. Others?
I just want to say a quick congrats to Rob and the entire Ivanhoe Cambridge team. It's an exceptional commitment, and they're continuing to lead the way. So huge kudos to them, and especially on the loan and the big 8.5 number. Tying that to GRESB is can be quite scary, I'm sure. The GRESB score is certainly dynamic, especially as we're learning more about what the 2025 roadmap looks like and what the vision of the assessment is going to be, certainly moving towards more performance-based metrics. So I'm very confident that Rob and the team are up to the challenge. I'm sure many, on the line today are also looking at, how, we can tie in KPIs to some internal targets and commitments like that as well. And GRESB is certainly one of the biggest indicators out there that's recognized in market. Investors understand, big banks understand. So it's certainly a huge area of focus for many.
Thanks, Eiley. That's very kind words.
Anybody have a good prop tech solution in their back pocket that they want to share with Rob? I know that people were really, when I first heard about EPL, It was from the Bentall folks, and they're like, "Oh goodness, don't tell anybody. They're our secret weapon." Right. So I don't know. I mean, Conan, you've got some good things to offer up.
Yeah, well, coming back to those two sides of things, the driving operational performance from year to year, and how that sits against the big capital pieces. On the driving ongoing performance, it's comes back to first of all having data and the tools to analyze and take action on that data, and being able to do that more and more in real time. You know, the historically of buildings with building automation systems, and you want to make changes to them, and it's about you know, figuring out what changes to make, then getting a contractor in, getting a controls provider in to make changes, and that takes time, and it takes effort and a lot of people thinking about it. I think change that we're seeing over the last year and going forward is really about shortening that cycle and automating more of it, so it becomes about identifying opportunities for improvement and implementing them in real time, quickly and efficiently, so that we can all move forward with the million other things going on in the world of a building operator. So that's I think that's a big piece of where prop tech, so to speak, can continue to drive performance.
So Rob, do you have a 100-day plan? And sort of what does that quickly look like? And then we're going to move the conversation to Ringo. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we didn't technically define a 100-day plan, but we did define a priority sort of list of how we're going to approach this. And to Ariel's earlier point on the climate change risk side, when you actually start to break this down, you start to see a bit of a pattern of where your exposure is the highest from an emissions perspective, and then how do you link that with what the drivers are in those particular markets, whether it's price of energy, whether it's carbon tax, whether it's prop tech opportunities, legislative and regulatory stuff. And once you start to piece all these things together, you get a pretty clear picture of where do you start and what do you start with. We're not going to solve everything in the first 100 days, but you can start to put pieces in place that have solutions in the short term, that you get some quick wins, you get some momentum on this, you set some precedents for how this might roll out, across markets. And we've done a fairly extensive, or we're in the process of doing a fairly extensive market analysis globally to determine what are the drivers in those regions that either exist now or may exist within the next few years, where things are sort of brewing and might help us along the way. Maybe in that case, we hold on those until a year or two from now, when the market is a bit more sort of capable of supporting to the extent that we need it to. So that's the approach essentially, and then there's a million little pieces within that, obviously, but that's the sort of big picture of how we are attacking this currently.
Perfect. Well, your work's cut out for you. We're going to keep checking in on you with you to see how things are going along. So keep up the good work. Quick wins are important just to keep everybody's momentum and excitement going. So otherwise, it's like, oh my goodness, we took on a daunter. All right. Well,
you got to break it down into small pieces for sure.
Exactly. Ringo, let's chat, you and I, right? So Director of Climate and Energy at Cadillac Fairview, right? You've been doing a great job. Here's some eye-opening stats about Cadillac Fairview. 2021 North American sector leader in office and retail, and top billing in GRESB, right? Strong score of 94, tied with Crown Realty for Canadian honors. So that very, very well done. But when it comes to, this is annual benchmark that we all participate in. 6-point jump overall, near perfect management score, 83% portfolio data coverage. So you mentioned millions of data points, millions of dollars, right? So hopefully that's a savings of millions of carbon bits too, right? Give us, talk to us a little bit and tell us some of your secrets.
Thanks, Dan. Just before I start there, all the amazing stats that you mentioned, credit goes to the team that puts it all together. I can't take a small part of the whole team that is sharing this common success. But back to your question, Dan, I think what we've noticed is, I again, back to part Conan's point on capital projects and ongoing performance improvements. Since 2010, really, we've had this internal sustainability program where we have motivated and encouraged sites to do all these capital projects to improve on their performance. And after like 5 to 8 years, we realized those low-hanging fruits are depleting. And we noticed that there will come a point where we won't have any more VFD upgrades, no more LED lighting to be switched out. So we need to switch our focus. So back in 2018, this is about 3 or 4 years ago now, we went down to the States actually and visited a campus of a technical giant in Silicon Valley. I don't want to name names. And they really showed us as an eye-opener on how we can leverage data in enhancing our visibility to how our systems and equipment is operating. And so, 4 years from now, a lot of bumps and bruises along the way. We did have some quick wins, to your point, just to get the momentum going. But we have this program now that really normalizes 30 of our AAA office properties across the country, 15 different BAS systems into common language. So at a single pane of glass, really, we can really very quickly identify which building has an opportunity that stands out that we can quickly jump on. And I think not only the millions of dollars and the millions of electron that we're saving, but what it does is it has given the operations team at the site a lot better visibility on how the equipment and systems are operating, and by extension, free up their time to do things that that they're so busy with on the day-to-day. So on an operational efficiency perspective, on top as well as an energy efficiency perspective, I think it hit those two birds in one stone. And what we've noticed through COVID, we actually leveraged this platform, this data platform, and we start to look at different things. We looked at ventilation, how much are we ventilating our space, and are we meeting what we desire to do? And again, because it's a common language, it's very easy for us to pick out which sites are over-ventilating, which sites are under-ventilating, and thereby we can give, again, directions, really solid directions with data and with graphs to the operations team and say, hey, I think you should do this. I think that site should do that. So it gives us that ability to do that.
So the data thing does feel daunting, right? It's we've got to weigh it against lease constructs, and we, Rob talked about those a little bit. Did you have to make a sizable dollar investment in order to elevate these metrics to go forward? Was there a bunch of money up front that you're kind of betting on the come, if you will, or how does that work?
Certainly, there is some capital investments to do that first leg of work, again, to normalize the BAS language. But certainly we have seen the payback come through very quickly. And we're actually in the midst of trying to figure out how to extend the current version of our program to other asset types. And very quickly, we learned that because of the cost of computing power, cloud computing rather, and sensors and all that has come down dramatically over the last couple of years, it really then absolutely enhances the business case for us to pursue adoption of this system in other asset types. So certainly, I think there's a very strict ROI on this. And I think the first hurdle, to your point, is daunting. We have the 50,000 data points that we gather on a 15-minute interval each day, resulting in close to 10 million data that we gather each day. We populate it and have this graphical user interface to populate it. But that first hurdle, yes, it is daunting. And I think the message that probably I want to come across, though, is it is worthwhile. Because at the end of the day, the sites really benefit from having that added visibility.
Yes, so I don't know. I'm not down at that level. Is it hard to hook up a building? Is it relatively easy? Has it gotten better, faster, cheaper over time?
Definitely, yeah. No, with the help of the ecosystem that we work with, it's becoming much easier than the first one that we've deployed 4 years ago. Again, that bumps and bruises along the way, I still carry them. I have badges and band-aids all around me. And at the beginning too, I guess part of the hurdle, it's just trying to get the operators at the different sites agreeing on this approach, because before then they kind of operate their own buildings, and it could be deemed as Big Brother looking over their shoulders and trying to get them to do things a certain way. So that hurdle, obviously, it's an obstacle, but we also circumvented it with telling them, actually, we're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to provide you with additional tools to help your building operate better. really what we're doing is then it's giving the equipment and system a voice, if you will, so that they don't need to be screaming at you and the BAS flashing red. We're just trying to, capture those anomalies before it becomes a problem.
I like that, giving the building a voice. That's solid. Rob, I saw you taking notes, right? I think you're gonna have a bunch of buildings that are chiming in. So last question, Ringo, what areas of focus for the coming years, right? You talked about the LEDs and maybe those are burned off, and so you don't have that to do anymore. Is there one or two things, right, that maybe the audience could take away that you're really focused on that they could too?
Yeah, no, I think it was mentioned before, probably echoing on the other panelist, with regards to just the next level of energy audits, if we will. I think traditionally we look at those capital projects, the low payback situations, and we would pursue those. I think again, because of those low hanging fruits being depleted, and in looking at this major goal in decarbonizing our buildings, we're looking forward in conducting what we call long-term energy plans in our key marquee sites that have traditional, a high emissions profile, greenhouse gas emissions profile, and very holistically, not just look at on a project by project basis, but holistically, how do we programize inserting certain capital projects that can really impact on the carbon emissions. So it's not just technology challenge, but also we need to look at all the transitional risk that was mentioned, the regulations, the carbon taxes, the caps of carbon per square foot in certain jurisdictions, and also tenant expectations and where that's going to go. And in looking at all those factors with all the lens that we have to put on, it would generate a better picture for our executives and for senior leadership and have them understand what is at stake here. And I think that would really help drive the momentum forward in really decarbonizing our buildings.
So I'm starting to pick up some themes, right? Same thing that Rob kind of talked about. You see the themes, they start to percolate to the top, and then you can figure out the action. I mean, it sort of feels like this, right? It's all about a Rubik's Cube and how do you get this thing solved? Because there's a lot of different moving parts.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, saving the best for last. Let's talk with, Eiley, you've been so patient, right? And now I sense you're about to run circles around these guys. So, so you're with this organization. It's now, you've gone through quite a lot of change, and change is one of the themes, right? Carbon, COVID, climate, and change. So Bentall Kennedy became Sun Life with an acquisition, merger into Green Oak, and by goodness, now you're global. And so if you think about your organization over time, and particularly with the relationship of GRESB, right? You've got tremendous number of sector leaderships and 5-star funds. And even this year, right? 5 submissions, 4 of them achieved GRESB 5-star, right? The BGO Diversified, the Prime Canadian, UK Value Fund, and Sun Life Portfolio. So, and then for the first time ever, all 5 of your funds were sector leaders on the development. So how are you going to top that? That's amazing.
Yeah, certainly a long list of accomplishments there. And certainly echoing Ringo, all credit goes to the team who are making this happen behind the scenes. Yeah, absolutely no pressure to continue this leadership. And we're seeing a lot of movement in the GRESB landscape this year alone, with 25% increase in number of participants. So the competition is certainly closing in. As you said, that top right corner of the GRESB benchmark is getting a little more crowded. And at this point, the team is really focusing on digging deep and finding those opportunities to drive performance that are most material and that are going to have the biggest impact. As I said earlier, we're beyond the low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of opportunity that the GRESB assessment has helped to highlight. Certainly, one big one being data coverage that I'm sure a lot of people are scratching their heads about. So a lot of focus is going into this area. We've got a great platform to build off of. We've got a great Forever Green tenant engagement program that's a long-standing strategy. And now at this point, with a lot of the shift, not only within our portfolio, but what we're seeing across industry, a lot of people are looking into industrial. And so we're looking at how do we shift and recalibrate this strategy. Previously, we've been in office a lot, as many peers here on the call today. But as we shift towards industrial and focusing on areas outside of our operational control, that's definitely going to be the next hurdle. So we're not taking our foot off the pedal yet.
Well, I can't imagine that. And so you know, you've got a great executive team as well. Sunny's the best in the business. Amy Price, she's amazing, right? So I have to believe, and it is sort of a common theme throughout these acquisitions, that ESG was, you know, at least as it shows up in our benchmark, Sun Life had been participating in GRESB for a long time and been doing quite well. So I've got to believe that this is probably seen as a core competency within the organization. Is that true? And if so, give us kind of like a flavor. Do you get a lot of resources at the top, or do you have to fight for resources?
No, we're certainly lucky enough to have an executive team that believes in this and is prioritizing this every day. Speaking to some of the organizational changes, you know, when we went through our most recent merger with Green Oak, we really didn't know where ESG was going to fall amongst the various priorities, and especially going global. But Sunny made that very clear from day one that ESG was the top priority. And that message has resonated throughout the organization. So, you know, we're continuing to focus on the E. Sunny has really championed being a leader on the S. And so last year we've announced a hiring target to achieve 2/3 of new hires being either people of color or women. And this is something that's been, that we've already exceeded. The organization has certainly embraced this, and you know, we've come out stronger from it. And on the E side, our commitment to net zero, which was just announced yesterday, is reinforcing our alignment and commitment to performance and reducing our impact.
So when I think about it, so I get to spend a lot of time with organizations, and I observe, you know, it's really easy to get the people that are on your side, right? Oh yeah, I want to do more, right? E means maybe some dollars, maybe it means, you know, but people want to do it. There are some people that you bump into, they're just total no's, right? And you're like, oh, I need to just navigate around this person because they're a roadblock. How do you engage the maybes, right? It's the maybes that are always the challenging, fun people, I suppose. Do you have any stories there, or any thoughts on that kind of question and topic?
Yeah, I mean, the maybes are certainly not a large group, but you know, they are certainly ones that we need to engage with, and we spend most of our time with. And the biggest thing that we can do is showcasing the value proposition, not only in terms of how it's going to support the fund goals and organizations, but how can it help meet their objectives. So aligning on that value proposition from the beginning, and that you need to start from there, because if it's not clear from the get-go, then you're going to have a difficult time navigating that discussion. So aligning early on what the objective is, and demonstrating the value is how we get on side. And a huge piece is also building relationships. Certainly speaking to how we've gone global, having those strong relationships with a lot of our new stakeholders has been a huge area of focus. So that's really gone a long way in terms of helping to move the needle.
Yeah, it's one thing to roll out a program. It's another thing to really, when you get to the maybes, oh, maybe I'll do this, but I don't know. I've got a lot of work I need to do, right? To me, the trigger is what's in it for me. How do you get that person, oh, here's what's in it for me and why I should be part of this. And then what's in it for the organization and all of those other things start to flow. Is that kind of your experience?
Completely. You know, I think everybody is busy, but what we've seen is having that reinforcement from our executive leadership team has really changed the way that people think about it. And we have a culture code internally, but one of the sort of the sentiments that we use is start with yes. And so a lot of the people that we engage with are coming to the table with that in mind. And so that's that sort of cultural element within the organization has helped to, you know, have these difficult conversations and come out with a strong outcome.
So as we navigate to the bottom of the hour, I've been kind of watching the questions as they've been coming, and I thank all my colleagues for answering some of them. The one that stuck out to me is we do have some people on the call that are not part of these really big organizations, but they're at smaller firms. And is there anything that we can think of, or some advice that we can offer to have them sort of get started and get moving? You know, a smaller property ownership group, right? But they've got fewer resources. Let's try to give these folks some advice. Who can we start with?
Jump in. I definitely think that we are in one of the best industries in the whole world, in the sense that we are all willing to open up and share what we're working on and what we're doing, because we're not just about the dollars and cents. We're trying to change the world. We're trying to change society. I'd say reach out to anybody on this panel, or anybody that you know in your city or across the country that you respect and you want to try to emulate their program, because really we all will learn best by learning from each other. And if you don't have the resources, I would be more than happy to share some of ours, and I'm sure our peers would as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, I just add to that too, just, get started, right? Everyone started somewhere, and, there's the old, everyone's somewhere on their sustainability journey. I hate that saying, but I always say it because it's so true. There's lots of leaders here, and there's lots who are just starting out, and that's the only way to do it. Start somewhere, start having those conversations, and move forward.
Yeah, there's no value in those that are maybe getting started now, having to go through all the pain that has been endured in the previous years by others. There's a lot of help available, to Ariel's point, to advance you beyond that and starting at a point where you can actually get some real things done. So echo those comments for sure.
Eiley, this is organizational change. I think that's what we're all trying to do. Tips and tricks?
Yeah, I mean, the panelists have certainly said it very well. Get started, maybe, breaking it into bite-sized pieces and tackling one thing at a time. You're not gonna, come up with something overnight, and it really is sort of making those incremental improvements, taking the small wins, and even opening up the dialogue internally and engaging those stakeholders will go a huge way. I mean, speaking from the platform that we built here in North America, it did almost feel like we were starting from scratch when we, embarked in Europe and Asia. And certainly Europe has a lot of tailwinds helping us on that. But, you have to start from the basics. And, one of the biggest things is on the data side. So once you get the data, you can make a lot of informed decisions based on all of that. So I would start there.
Perfect. Ringo, rounding home?
Well, yeah, just maybe round it up with Ali's point there. You can't manage what you don't monitor. So I think back to that data point, I think that's the crux and the fundamentals of it. And perhaps just leaning on us, as well as other folks in the regulatory or utility side. I think there's tons of resources and incentives that promotes those quick wins and low-hanging fruits. So I would suggest to look into those programs and expedite some of your projects.
So I have got 2 points. One is do GRESB. It is the best practices. It's made up by all of us. We've all contributed to it. Everybody on this call, everybody from around the globe. It is a framework of best practices, right? And so organizations often start in the teens. And what's a bad day is if you stay in the teens. What's a good day is if your 17 becomes a 34, becomes a 51, becomes a 68. That is awesome. Second is to join Chris's ESG group at RealPac, right? They convene people on a monthly and quarterly basis and talk about these issues. And that really reinforces Ariel's point, which is we're all in this together, and people are more than willing to share their best practices and their experiences to get everybody moving along. So that's my view of this. Michael, what did you hear today that you thought was very compelling, and bring us home, round it out for us? Oh, you're on mute. Wait.
I was actually taking some notes of every speaker's main points, and it was really encouraging. It's hard, sometimes you don't connect with all of your members all the time. Conan talked about targets. I love the fact that he brought up avoided obsolescence is a driver that's just, in fact, maybe more important than payback period. And that just so reminds me of 2008 to 2010. Ariel talked about the Munich Re data and the value at risk. What a great approach. And I think that's a great way to look at hazard risk for portfolios. Dan talked about the net zero commitments and what has to go right and come together. But what Ivanhoe has done is set a target without knowing the path to get there. And that reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. Pick a target. That's what I get from Rob, what Rob mentioned about that. Ringo talked about technical wins and about little tweaks all the way through: energy audits, working on the low fruit, move up the tree, and the programmizing CapEx. I think that was the term he used, that will impact carbon emissions. Just a great block and tackle kind of approach to this. And Eiley talked about starting with yes culturally. And I was thinking of that movie, The Yes Man, for a little while there, but team cultural and how important culture is with everybody. And yeah, targets. Great conversation today. And Dan, you set this up so well. COVID, carbon, and climate. I think that was a great context for all this, and you really should unwrap that Rubik's Cube. I think I saw plastic on it still. So
No, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Oh, you can do it.
I'll fix it. Yeah. Michael, thank you. I mean,
Just kidding.
Hopefully the COVID goes away. We all want that. And I hope to see everybody next year in the fall where we can have an in-person again, because those are always the best. So with that, everybody, thank you very much. Big thanks to our panelists. Thanks to the GRESB team, and thanks to RealPAC, our awesome host. And we're looking forward to making progress in 2022. Until then, be well.
And the bar is now open at the back of the room for mingling. Go ahead and help yourself.
Tremendous. Our host.
We meet you back there.
Thank you so
All
much.
right,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.